Chinese car brands have hit a record high in Europe. Now, you would think these tariffs would have slowed down sales of Chinese electric cars in Europe, and they haven't. They've actually done the opposite, which is shocking considering these tariffs are still enormous. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching the Electric Viking. What are the details here? Well, Chinese brands have set new records in Europe, and there is a combined market share total that shows they're actually outpacing some of the European rivals in Europe. They increased their market share from 5.4% to 5.5% in May, and their monthly growth rate slowed to 48% compared with 85% in May and 72% in the first half of this year. Overall this year, Chinese brands, their growth rate in Europe has been 70% in spite of these tariffs, which is just remarkable. In the European market, down 6% to 1.2 million new car registrations. Chinese automakers sold 65,000 vehicles in June, up from 44,000 during the same month last year, according to preliminary figures from market researcher Dataforce, representing 96% of sales in Europe, in the European Union, EFTA markets, and the UK. Basically, this is all of Europe, including the UK. Gives you a good idea of just what's happening here. Which car makers are doing well? SAIC with MG Motor, which a lot of people still think is a British brand. They fell 19% to 25,000. MG was down by a slump in sales for the electric MG4. She's getting a little long in the tooth now. There's a replacement version coming soon. It has lost nearly 6,300 sales. A 72% decline compared with June 2024. Other brands are doing well. BYD, it is taking away sales from MG, I think is fair to say, because its sales have grown by 303% to 15,000 in Europe in just 1 month. Chery, they actually introduced Omoda and JQ marquees, the new brands. Their sales increased tenfold to 8,860. So Chery's sales increased by 1,000% compared to last year. As you can see though, BYD just, did outsell them significantly. Nearly twice as many cars sold by BYD than Chery. Extra tariffs imposed by the European Union since November on battery electric vehicles imported from China continue to cause Chinese manufacturers to shift away from EVs. In June, Chinese automakers' EV shares declined to 36% from 48% in the same month last year. Meanwhile, what's happened is because there's no tariffs on plug-in hybrids, their sales have gone up. Their share of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles grew to 22% from 4% last year. Nearly 1 in 4 plug-in hybrids sold in Europe is now Chinese. And, well, no tariffs. What's going to happen? It was predictable this would happen. And hybrid market share grew from 5% to 15%. It tripled as well. Shares of gasoline-powered models declined to 23% from 38% in June 2024. In other words, the Chinese are moving away from gasoline-powered vehicles. They know they're not the future and they're rubbish. Interestingly, though, new analysis across all of Europe says plug-in hybrids are actually 20% dirtier over their lifespan, including the cost of manufacturing, the CO2 emissions, etc., than internal combustion. So for the environment, EVs are 73% better, even if they're not used on renewable energy, about 93% better if they're used on renewables. Plug-in hybrids, 20% worse than gasoline, which is quite a shock. Anyhow, MG is leading the way among Chinese brands when it comes to sales of full hybrid cars. MG's hybrid bestseller was the MG3 small hatchback, which I honestly think is crap, and most people have reviewed it, say it's not a great car, but it's very, very cheap. 9,500 of MG3's 9,600 sales in June, though, were full hybrids. BYD was the plug-in hybrid leader among Chinese brands, with the CLU accounting for 6,000 of the combined sales of all Chinese players of 14,500 plug-in hybrids. In other words, BYD accounted for about 40% of all plug-in hybrids sold by Chinese companies in Europe. For fully electric cars, the MG4 had a narrow lead among Chinese brands at 2,664 sales. just ahead of Polestar 4, which is made in China, with 2,385 sales, and the Polestar 2 at 2,363 sales. So Polestar this year, 51% increase in sales worldwide, first 6 months of the year. 51% increase in sales for the company. That's really good results for them. Chinese brands, Europe sales jumped 72% though in the first half, and that's the big number here. That means their sales increased to nearly 328,000 in a market that's down by 1.1% to 6.9 million. That means they've increased their share to 4.8% from 2.8% in the first half of last year. Nearly doubled their market share. MG sales rose by 18% to 151,435 ahead of BYD. Total sales at 70,000. But BYD sales have gone up enormously. I mean, MG sales up 18%, not bad. BYD up 312%. Chery up 1,390%. Geely up 68%. So Geely sales were 30,000, Chery 38,000. XPeng sales have increased by about 160% as well. These four automakers, though, that I just mentioned before, accounted for 88% of all sales in Europe from Chinese automakers in the first half. In other words, really, BYD, Chery, Geely, and MG, they own the market. They have nearly 90% market share in Europe. What do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching. Bye-bye. In April, the best-selling car, regardless of powertrain, was an electric hatchback made by Geely. And interestingly, in fact, very interestingly, Geely is clearly catching up to BYD. I don't know why no one's noticing this fact, but Geely are clearly taking market share. And the top 10 best-selling electric cars in China this year, for the first 4 months of the year, the top 10, number one was not a BYD, was not a Tesla, it was this Geely EV. But Geely, they don't just have the number one best-selling car in China this year. When it comes to electric cars, in the top 10 list, they have 3 of the top 10. BYD only have 2. Electric car sales in China they've risen pretty dramatically this year. And the best-selling EV in the month of April was a car that I think most people, I'd say 99% of people in Australia and the United States and even the UK and Europe would have never ever heard of.